because we're going to dig into the college football playoffs. The picture's starting to come a little bit into shape, a little bit in the focus, if you will. I know I've been messing with my camera here, as you and I have been talking about for, it seems like probably the last 12 hours to get this 1 hour podcast in. That is coming to focus. Now, we're talking about the college football playoff picture starting to come into focus. We're starting to see certain teams get their, I guess you could call, make your own path, your own destiny. You can set your own destiny. And with that being said, you have teams like Tennessee, who beat Alabama. Might I say is probably the greatest game so far this year. You have Georgia, who has really set themselves up. The Tennessee versus Georgia game is going to be electric. I'm really looking forward to that one in a few weeks here. Alabama is not a team that has set their own destiny. Because of that loss to Tennessee, I think that now we probably will see them in the SEC championship because they are on the weaker side of the division, but I don't think they are in a set your own destiny. I don't think they are, not yet. Michigan, Ohio State, we'll see them at the end of the year. One of those teams set their own destiny when they win that football game, right? Especially after we saw what Michigan did to Penn State. I'm assuming we're going to see the same kind of thing when Ohio State takes on Penn State this week. We're definitely going to dig into that on Saturday. All right. And then you got the Pac-12. We don't really have anybody right now who's going to be in that Pac-12. I think there might be someone, maybe a one-loss team. Maybe Oregon comes back. Who knows? Oregon looked really good this last week against UCLA. If they go one loss, win the Pac-12 championship, do they have an opportunity? However, they don't write their own destiny. I would say the only team left is Clemson, who writes their own destiny. But there's one more team who keeps getting dismissed, and I almost did it myself. Maybe I did it on purpose to lead it to you, Steve. In the Big 12, TCU, an undefeated football team, in arguably the deepest conference in football right now, seems to be getting dismissed to be writing their own destiny to being in the college football playoffs.
Yeah, I just don't understand. I mean, it's been fun because each week seems to have a new team that America wants to embrace. It was Kansas. It's been, all of these other teams. I mean, Syracuse was such a good story. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And quite honestly, they had a really good chance of beating Clemson. That hats off to Clemson. They came back. They got that job.
That was a great game. That was a great football game. Right down to the end. I mean, Schrader, unfortunate interception there, but I mean, they had an opportunity to do it. I mean, you could blame the penalties, how they were. Some people believe it was one-sided. I mean, you can call it any way you want to. I mean, Clemson won the football game, though. I mean, we've seen worse penalty games in especially some SEC teams in the past. So, regardless, back to TCU.
TCU just finds a way to win football games. They don't panic. They don't get frustrated. They don't go, off script. Okay, it's not an improv session, with this team where you see a lot of that. Especially in the SEC, there's a lot of improv going on where people are trying to do something different. They just win football games. Sonny Dykes is becoming a folk hero in Fort Worth. I mean, and if you think about it, this has to be a redemption year for TCU because they got screwed in 2014. They should have been in that playoff in 2014, but it was all the shiny toys and the flashy toys that got all the knocks, and they were not included in the playoff. And that it's one of the probably biggest injustices that have happened, in this college playoff era. And it's not like, you and I have a horse in this race with TCU. They just play great football. They're fun to watch. They have a big time quarterback in Dugan. And it's just all the games are entertaining.
Right.
And that's what you want in a playoff. I mean, you were going through all the top teams. Okay, Ohio State's the best team in the country. I don't care who wants to vote and keep Georgia there. Okay, Georgia is not playing with the same amount of dominance as they did last year. So stop voting as if you're voting that team in. Okay, and now Georgia's now faced with for the first time in a while, probably a legitimate threat to them in Tennessee. Agreed. So we have the focus, but I wouldn't say it's sharpened. I think we have one of those larger panoramic kind of views on a movie scene, and the camera is slowly panning in, but we really don't see the heroes yet in focus. They're there. You can see them, in the background, but you don't really see them yet. I think Clemson, unless they have a misstep, I think Clemson probably, like you said, controls its shot to be a playoff team. I've been saying all year you can't have two teams out of the Big Ten. Maybe you can.
Maybe you can.
Yeah, if Michigan keeps dominating the way they have, maybe you do. Maybe it's not two teams out of the SEC because, okay, Alabama's probably going to be in the conference championship, like you said. I think they would have to have a pretty convincing win to have the committee put them in the playoff. But again, it's a shiny toy thing. It's a ratings thing. It's who do people want to watch? You mentioned Oregon. If Oregon can run the table, that's a program that just generates excitement simply because Nike keeps coming up with more and more outlandish uniforms for them. And they play an entertaining brand of football. TCU, please, fans, you need to make your voice heard here. You need to get on the message boards and call in shows and hold up signs at game days, even if you have to travel to whatever the game day is. I mean, game days at Jackson State this week, right?
Yep.
Okay, TCU fans, get your Horned Frog signs up there. Get some of this Deion Sanders show stuff off the thing. Put your signs up there. Let people know that you are the best team in the deepest, and I will say the best conference top to bottom in America. So
Easily.
if you're that best team, you have to be in the playoff, not just the conversation. You need to be in that playoff. And I don't see any team stopping them over the remaining 5 games. I just don't see West Virginia has too many injuries. I just don't see it happening.
When you have a conference like at the bottom of the barrel right now, Iowa State, who has beat a Big Ten school in Iowa, who's not having the greatest year, but still, who has played very well against other top teams in their conference, like Baylor, like Texas, and they're at the bottom. West Virginia, who beat last year's Big 12 champion just the other week, Baylor. You can't tell me that's not the deepest conference in the league. So I'm with you 100%. I'm not 100% with you thinking that Ohio State may be the best team in the country, only because I don't think I've seen it yet. I feel like I feel like it's just like our Michigan conversation the last couple of weeks, where we are like, okay, is this the time we're actually going to say this is where Michigan will finally prove themselves? We said it with Maryland. We said that with, I can't forget who played between them, and then Iowa, right? And then Penn State. With Ohio State, we said, okay, we're going to see that with Iowa, and then Iowa really, crapped the bed with their offense. So it's like, okay, maybe we didn't get to see that. We've seen flashes of good and flashes of very bad. Really, just the only time against Michigan for the Nittany Lions. And I know you're hating me say this, but Penn State's not an awful team this year. They're not awful. They're going to be. They are going to be Ohio State's toughest competition until they meet Michigan. So now I think this is the opportunity for Ohio State to prove they're the best team in the country. I'm not going to give them that nod yet because I do think that they have a little bit more to prove based on who they played. That's all. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying they're a bad football team because I do think they, probably next week when we do talk about, we're on Monday mornings and we talk about the games from the Saturday, that'll probably be the first thing you say. Ohio State's the best team in the country because they're probably going to do it to Penn State what Michigan did to Penn State. Might even be worse because, they beat Iowa worse than Michigan did. So it might even be worse. That's the assumption, right? However, back to that TCU conversation, I really do think TCU has to go undefeated.
Well, sure.
To be in the conversation. I think the only opportunity for a one-loss football team is probably an SEC team. Maybe one of those Big Ten teams from Ohio State or Michigan if their only loss is from that one, and then the other team goes undefeated. That might be the only team. But those two conferences, I think, will take it over TCU. I think if you have a one-loss Alabama who won the SEC championship, you're getting in. And then you might still get a one-loss Georgia or a one-loss Tennessee. And then in that case, you probably have an undefeated. Let's just say Ohio State wins that one. And then if Clemson goes undefeated, they're in. So you got 2 undefeateds and then 2 one-loss SECs. I can see that being a scenario. Another scenario could be, what if Clemson loses? Maybe in an ACC championship, maybe in your favorite Notre Dame, right? They look good this year. No, but there's an opportunity that Clemson could still lose a football game. ACC championships aren't anything like Wake Forest could come back. Syracuse could have a comeback. Both those games were good games. They came down to the very end. Adjustments could happen, and an ACC championship could make it happen. If Clemson's a one-loss team and TCU's a one-loss team, who do you give it to? I give it to TCU because I think Big 12 is a better, tougher conference, but that is the only option in my mind. Now, take me back one more step. If TCU is a one-loss team, if Clemson's a one-loss team, neither of them probably make it, right? Because they're going to hand it to probably Michigan or Ohio State, that one-loss team. That's the crazy scenario here. Unless TCU wins the Big 12 championship, then maybe they'll give it to TCU because they're the one-loss team that won their conference instead of the one-loss team from the Big 10 that didn't. I mean, that is probably the only option here. What I'm trying to get to after this crazy jumble board here, I got the pins and the red string and the blue string going every which way. TCU's got to be undefeated if they want to make the college football playoffs.
Right.
And Texas is their toughest test left before getting to the Big 12 championship. Who they'll probably have to play the Pokes. Texas is the toughest on their schedule. They got Iowa State, who plays a different kind of football. I don't know if they match up that great against Iowa State, or maybe if they match up well against Texas Tech. And we saw what Texas Tech just did last week. I mean, they might be on the rise. But I do think overall, looking at the schedule where they sit right now, Texas is their toughest team. I just talked about 3 of the remaining games and saying it might be a challenge. That's how deep this conference is. And if you have to tell me you have to go through the gauntlet of from the ceiling to the basement of a team that could beat you. I mean, if we look at these odds, if you took Ohio State versus the bottom team in the basement of the Big 10, the money line, the spread would not be -8.5 like it probably is if you got a West Virginia versus TCU right now. Right? Just wouldn't be. It wouldn't be that case. This conference is absolutely outstanding. And if you can go undefeated in it, you deserve a place at the table.
Out of curiosity, and I want to keep talking about TCU, but you came up with so many different scenarios.
Yeah, they're fun.
Can you see the SEC getting shut out?
Not after this past week. I thought there was a scenario at one point, right? And we were kind of talking about it. I threw a little hypothetical over at you in the DMs when UCLA was still undefeated, and we still had an undefeated Syracuse. I guess Syracuse really doesn't come into play here, but really it was with the undefeated UCLA. Because what if UCLA goes undefeated? What if Clemson goes undefeated? What if Michigan goes undefeated, let's just say? And then what if TCU goes undefeated? There's 4 undefeated teams. And then what if, let's say, Georgia loses to Tennessee, and then Alabama beats Tennessee? So then you get all 1-loss teams in the SEC after the SEC championship is over. And then you have 4 undefeated teams from other conferences. That was the only way I thought that scenario could happen, where you had 4 undefeated teams left. With UCLA losing, I think that's out the window now. I think SEC has punched their ticket to the college football playoffs to at least 1 team. We're probably going to see 2. Let's be honest with each other. We're probably going to see 2 unless TCU goes undefeated. I think TCU is SEC's biggest problem right now, and they don't even play them. It's the fact that you're probably going to get a Clemson in, and you're going to get a Big 10 team in. It's going to happen. It's going to be Michigan or Ohio State, and it's going to be Clemson if they do their job. Like, that's it. You got 2 of them in already. TCU is going to rain on the SEC's parade if they go undefeated, because they're not going to get a 1-loss team in if you have an undefeated team from the Big 12 this year.
What has Georgia done in the last 4 weeks that makes them to be the number 1 team in the country? That Ohio State has gotten better. Again, do they play cupcakes? Yes. Lots of frosting on those cupcakes.
Right.
Early on. But they're just so ridiculously deep and talented. And they've done what they needed to do week in, week out. Georgia is kind of sputtered and spit and stalled. Oh, shoot, I didn't get it in gear. Let me start it again. And they eventually do get in gear and then pass the team. I just don't see it. And God forbid if Tennessee would lose before, they would play Georgia. I think Georgia gets exposed in a conference thing. And then I just don't know.
Tennessee's got a gauntlet in the next 2 weeks. They got Kentucky and then they got Georgia, right? To answer your question with Georgia, And I think they've done more than Ohio State this season. They put a whomping on Oregon in the first game. Now, don't get me wrong. That was the first game of a new head coach, the first
Mhm.
game of Bo Nix in Oregon. We've obviously seen a brand new Oregon team. You know, if Oregon and Georgia played each other this week, if it would be a college game day, by the way, I don't think that game ends the way it does. I don't even know if Georgia wins that football game if
Right.
that game ends right now. But they did it. They won that. So you got to give them that nod. They beat South Carolina very nice, who South Carolina is really starting to look good right now. So it looks like they're benefiting from playing teams early that didn't figure it out yet. Because Shane Bieber's got Shane Bieber. I'm going to almost saying that wrong. I'm gonna get all everybody's just pissed off at me today. They got that team fired up. They're what 25th in the nation now. I don't agree with. I think Liberty
But you're
deserves
right.
to
Yeah.
be
Right. I mean,
25,
right.
but regardless, and then they beat Auburn, who, although I've been crying saying that Brian Harsin deserves to be gone, he's not yet. He's kind of got that team looking okay. I will say okay. There have been moments where they've looked okay. Those 3 games are significantly tougher than any other team that Ohio State's played for. That's why I'll say that they deserve it over Ohio State right now. That's it. Next week after they beat Penn State, I don't have that argument anymore for you. I don't.
Fair enough.
With
Fair
that
enough.
being said, Georgia plays Florida this week, and that's always been a tough game for Florida, or for Georgia, I should say. And Georgia's the spread, they're giving them 22.5 points. I mean, right off the bat. Well, I mean, this is gonna be a game we talk about later on the weekend, but I'm gonna get that spread in now because that points are coming down. You know it's gonna come down. It's gonna get closer to probably negative 18 or something like that. Play it now because they're not gonna lose by that much. It's not gonna happen. I mean, Florida's going to give them a run for their money. This is one of those 3:30 CBS games. This is one of those games you pay attention to. Yeah, this is one of those ones that you're like, okay, this is where the Anthony Richardson NFL draft stuff starts happening. This is where that happens. Yeah, I love these scenarios. We could talk about these for days. We probably could have a full episode on them.